He thought sending money was enough, until he came home and found his mother wandering the streets. Jackson had been gone for years, believing everything was handled, every problem solved from a distance. But before he even reached the house, something felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty. And under a dim streetlight, someone was sitting there, fragile, shivering, forgotten. He stepped closer and froze, because beside her was his dog, the one who had never left her side. "Before we begin, where are you watching from? Tell me below." A late autumn wind slid through Cedar Glen, carrying the kind of cold that didn't bite the skin so much as settle quietly into the bones. Jackson Hale walked alone down the narrow street, boots striking the pavement with a steady, measured rhythm that had not left him even after years away from active duty. At 42, he carried the kind of presence that did not need to raise its voice to be felt. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a solid, disciplined build shaped by decades of training. His dark hair was cut short in a military style, flecked faintly with gray at the temples, and a rough stubble framed a jawline sharpened by both age and restraint. His eyes, clear pale blue, were calm, but never relaxed. They belonged to a man who had learned to read danger before it fully arrived. He had been a Navy SEAL for most of his adult life. Precision, control, distance. Those were the rules that had kept him alive. But none of those rules had prepared him for silence, the kind waiting behind the front door of a house that used to be full. Claire's absence lived there. His first wife had died 3 years ago, taken slowly by an illness that gave him just enough time to watch and not enough to save. Since then, Jackson had become a man who completed tasks instead of living moments. He sent money home every month, paid for medication, repairs, insurance. After remarrying, he believed he had done the responsible thing, left his mother in the care of someone who promised warmth where he could only provide distance. Vanessa. He had believed her. Jackson turned the corner toward his street and stopped. Under a flickering street lamp, something shifted in the darkness. At first, it looked like a pile of old blankets. Then it moved. A figure, small, frail, folded inward as if trying to disappear from the cold. He approached slowly, instinct guiding each step. His breath steadied, shoulders lowering slightly, not out of calm, but control. Then he saw the dog, a German shepherd, large, though thinner than it should have been. Black and tan coat dulled by neglect, but unmistakable. Its ears stood alert, its amber eyes sharp, reflective, aware. Rex, 6 years old, trained, loyal. Sent home by Jackson after Claire died, because the house had felt too quiet, too empty, and he had thought a dog could fill spaces that grief left behind. Rex didn't move toward him. It stayed exactly where it was, pressed tightly against the figure it guarded. Jackson's gaze shifted. The blankets weren't blankets. They were an old woman's coat. Margaret Hale, his mother. She looked smaller than he remembered, as if time had quietly taken pieces of her without asking permission. Her skin was pale, stretched thin over sharp bones, and her gray hair, once neatly kept, hung loose and uneven around her face. Her hands, frail but trembling with urgency, clutched tightly into Rex's fur. "Mom?" Jackson said, his voice low, almost careful. Margaret flinched. Her eyes lifted, clouded and searching, struggling to recognize what stood in front of her. But instead of relief, fear flooded her expression. "Please, don't take him," she whispered, pulling Rex closer. "He didn't leave me. Please don't take him." The words didn't land like sound. They hit like something heavier. Jackson felt it, not in his chest, but deeper, like something shifting out of place inside him. Rex looked at him. No bark, no excitement, no movement, just a long, steady gaze. And then, subtle, deliberate, It leaned closer to Margaret, choosing her. That was when Jackson understood something he hadn't allowed himself to consider. While he had been away, someone had stayed. And it wasn't him. He removed his jacket slowly and draped it over Margaret's shoulders. His movements were careful, deliberate, the way he approached wounded things in the field, slow enough not to startle, steady enough to mean safety. "It's me," he said quietly. "Jackson." Her eyes lingered on his face, searching through layers of memory. For a brief second, something flickered. Recognition, maybe. Then it vanished. "Don't make me go," she murmured. A coin slipped from her hand, clinking softly against the pavement before rolling to a stop near Jackson's boot. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Jackson didn't pick it up. He just stared at it, at how small it was, at how much it seemed to weigh. Later, in the back of a taxi, Margaret refused to release Rex. The dog lay pressed against her legs, body tense, head lifted slightly toward the window, every muscle still tuned to the world outside. At the hospital, fluorescent lights painted everything in sterile honesty. The doctor, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a voice worn down by too many similar nights, didn't soften the truth. "She's severely malnourished," he said, "dehydrated. And based on her condition, this didn't happen overnight. This has been going on for months." Jackson stood still, not reacting, not moving, just absorbing. Through the glass, he watched Margaret lying on the hospital bed, her hand resting weakly on Rex's neck. The dog hadn't moved since they arrived. It stood like a silent sentinel, refusing to leave her side. A nurse approached and handed Jackson a small cloth bag. This was with her. Inside, overdue bills, unopened prescriptions, and a crumpled piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was unsteady, fragile. "Vanessa says you're busy. Don't call. Rex stays with me. That's enough." Jackson's jaw tightened, but his face remained still, cold, precise, the kind of stillness that came right before something irreversible. He looked up, and for the first time that night, his eyes changed. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else, "I find out exactly who did this." Morning came to Cedar Glen without warmth, the sky a flat sheet of gray that pressed low over the town as if even the sun had chosen not to witness what lingered beneath it. Jackson Hale stood outside the front door of his house, the same house he had left months ago, believing it was safe, believing it still held the quiet dignity of a life maintained. In his hand was the old key, worn, familiar, unchanged. For a moment he didn't move, not because he hesitated, but because something inside him had already begun preparing for what he would find. A Navy SEAL learned long ago that the worst damage was rarely loud. It was methodical, invisible at first glance. He opened the door. The air inside greeted him like a forgotten room, cold, stale, carrying a faint scent of dust, and something else harder to name. Not decay, not neglect alone. Something closer to absence. The living room stopped him first, not because of what was there, because of what wasn't. The couch was gone. The rug that Claire had chosen years ago, soft, cream-colored, always slightly uneven at the corner, was gone. The standing lamp beside it, the one his mother used during long winter evenings, had disappeared too. Even the framed photographs that once lined the wall, wedding pictures, family snapshots, small captured proofs of belonging, had been removed, leaving behind faint rectangular shadows on the paint. Jackson stepped further inside, boots echoing softly. His gaze moved with controlled precision, cataloging loss the way he once mapped terrain. Nothing had been taken randomly. There was a pattern, items of value, items easy to resell, items tied to memory. The kitchen confirmed it. The refrigerator was gone, leaving behind a dull outline against the wall. Cabinets stood open, nearly empty. A single chipped bowl sat in the corner of the counter, beside a plastic bag folded too neatly to belong to chaos. Jackson opened one cabinet after another, finding only fragments. A spoon, a cracked mug, an expired box of cereal pushed to the back like an afterthought. Then he saw it. A dog food bag, flattened, rolled carefully from the bottom, as if someone had tried to make it last longer than it should have. Jackson picked it up, feeling how light it was, how empty. His jaw tightened, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough to shift something behind his eyes. Rex hadn't just stayed, he had endured. Jackson moved down the hallway toward his mother's bedroom. He stopped at the doorway. The bed was gone. There was no mattress, no dresser, no chair. Only a thin blanket folded on the wooden floor and a pillow so worn it barely held shape. The window was slightly open, letting in the cold air that still lingered from the night before. For a long moment, Jackson didn't move. His mind did something dangerous then. It filled the space. Margaret lying there, curled, weak. Rex pressed against her side, using his body heat to keep her alive through nights no one else had witnessed. The image formed with brutal clarity, and once it did, it didn't leave. "You finally came back." The voice came from behind him. Jackson turned. A woman stood in the doorway, arms folded loosely, posture straight despite her age. She was in her late 60s, tall and lean, with sharp cheekbones and silver hair pulled into a low bun at the nape of her neck. Her skin was pale but weathered, the kind shaped by years of outdoor seasons and quiet endurance. Her eyes were clear, observant, too observant to miss much, too honest to pretend otherwise. "Eleanor Brooks," she said. "I live next door." Jackson gave a short nod. "You've seen what happened here." Eleanor stepped inside slowly, her gaze sweeping across the stripped room. "I've seen enough to know I should have done more." She spoke without dramatics, without self-pity, just fact. "At first your wife seemed kind," Eleanor continued. "Vanessa, wasn't it? She smiled often, brought baked goods, said all the right things. People like that don't raise alarms, not at the beginning." Jackson listened without interrupting. "She said she was helping your mother," Eleanor went on. "That you were busy, that everything was under control." Her lips pressed together slightly before she added, "Then things started disappearing." Jackson's attention sharpened. Small items first, then furniture, then anything worth selling. She always had an explanation. Medical bills, repairs, better care. Eleanor shook her head faintly. "But your mother didn't get better. She got smaller." Jackson's gaze shifted briefly toward the empty room again. "And the dog?" he asked. Eleanor's expression changed. "That dog never left her," she said. "Not once. I saw it in the yard, in the doorway, sometimes outside at night. Always watching. Always between your mother and everything else." She paused, then added quietly, "Your wife didn't like that." Jackson didn't react outwardly, but something in his posture tightened. "I heard her once," Eleanor said. "Said she could sell the dog. Said it was worth money. That it was just an animal." Jackson's hand closed slowly around the empty dog food bag. "There's more," Eleanor said, glancing toward the back door. "A couple weeks ago, I saw your mother outside, late, past midnight. She was holding onto that dog like it was the only thing keeping her upright." Jackson's breathing slowed. "The door behind her was locked," Eleanor added. That detail settled differently. Not confusion, not accident, intent. Jackson walked toward the back entrance. Near the trash bin, something caught his eye. A metal chain. New, heavy, unused, but not for lack of intention. He picked it up. Cold steel, measured length, bought for purpose. Behind him, Eleanor spoke again, softer now. That dog, I think it led her out, toward the street, toward light. Jackson looked at the chain in his hand, a tool meant to restrain, a plan interrupted, or perhaps escaped. Inside the house, he searched further. In a lower drawer, hidden beneath old paperwork, he found documents. Bank transfers, receipts, purchases that had nothing to do with care, expensive items, personal indulgences, and then a printed form, deposit agreement, working dog, German shepherd, scheduled transfer, no elderly dependent included. Jackson stared at it for a long time. Then he folded it once, carefully, precisely. When he stepped outside, the gray sky hadn't changed. Neither had the air, but something inside him had. He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Robert," he said when the line connected. His voice was low, controlled, stripped of anything unnecessary. "I need you in Cedar Glen." A pause. "How serious is it?" the man asked. Jackson looked back at the house, at the empty windows, at the place where a family had been reduced to what could be sold. "Serious enough," Jackson said, "that a dog had to take my place." By late afternoon, the hospital corridors had taken on that peculiar stillness that comes when visiting hours blur into something quieter, more watchful, as if even the walls were listening. Jackson Hale stood near the window at the end of the hall, arms relaxed at his sides, posture straight, without effort. From the outside, he looked like a man waiting. From the inside, he had already moved 3 steps ahead. That was how he had survived for years, never reacting to what was happening, only to what came next. Behind him, inside the room, Margaret slept. Her breathing was shallow but steady now, her frail hand still resting against the thick fur at Rex's neck. The German shepherd lay pressed against the side of the bed, his body curved slightly inward, always angled toward her, never fully at rest. Even in stillness, there was intention in him, a quiet readiness, like a soldier who had learned to sleep without surrendering awareness. Jackson watched them for a moment longer before turning his attention back to the hallway. That was when he saw her. Vanessa Hale walked in with the kind of composure that came from practice. She was in her late 30s, tall and elegantly built, with smooth, carefully styled blonde hair falling just past her shoulders. Her skin was flawless in the way that came from maintenance, not ease, and her features were arranged with subtle precision. Nothing exaggerated, everything calculated. She wore a cream-colored coat that fit perfectly, heels that made no unnecessary sound, and a face that carried just enough concern to appear sincere without looking strained. She had always known how to look right. "Jackson," she said softly, her voice controlled, warm in tone but measured in distance. "Why didn't you call me?" Jackson didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch just long enough to remove the comfort from her question. "I wanted to see what was still standing before anyone tried to explain it," he said. Vanessa paused, just for a fraction of a second. It was small, but it was there. "I've been worried sick," she replied, stepping closer. "No one told me she was in the hospital." Jackson's gaze held steady on her face, not searching for guilt, not accusing, just observing. "You told her not to call," he said. The sentence landed clean. Vanessa's expression didn't break, but something beneath it shifted, like a surface tension disturbed. "I was trying to protect you," she said. "You were working. You were already under pressure." Jackson tilted his head slightly, studying her. "From what?" he asked. Vanessa exhaled slowly, adjusting her posture as if preparing for a different kind of conversation. "From everything," she said. "Your mother wasn't easy, Jackson. She forgot things. She wandered. She refused help. She clung to that dog like it was the only thing she trusted. Do you have any idea what that's like, living with someone like that every day?" There it was. Not denial. Justification. Jackson didn't interrupt. I did what I could, Vanessa continued, her voice sharpening slightly. But I was alone. You were gone. You sent money, yes, but money doesn't sit up all night when someone is screaming because they don't recognize their own home. For a moment, Jackson said nothing, because part of what she said was true, and truth, when mixed with harm, had a way of complicating things that should have been simple. I wasn't here, Jackson admitted quietly. Vanessa's eyes flickered with something like relief. Yes, she said. Exactly. You weren't. He nodded once. That was my mistake. The words came without hesitation. Vanessa straightened slightly, as if sensing the shift. But what you did after that, Jackson continued, wasn't a mistake. Her jaw tightened. Be careful, she said softly. Jackson reached into his jacket and pulled out the documents he had found. One by one, he placed them on the small table beside them. Bank transfers, purchase receipts, medical neglect, the dog sale agreement. Vanessa looked down at them, then back up, and for the first time, the softness in her expression disappeared completely. You don't understand the situation, she said. Then explain it, Jackson replied. Vanessa crossed her arms, her posture no longer defensive. Now it was controlled, deliberate. I adjusted, she said. I made decisions. Things cost money. I needed to maintain some level of normal life. You sold the house from the inside out, Jackson said. I liquidated assets, she corrected. You starved her. I managed resources. You tried to sell him. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the room behind them, toward Rex. It's a dog, she said. The simplicity of that sentence did more damage than any argument. Behind the door, there was movement. A low sound, not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakable. Rex had risen. Jackson didn't turn. Vanessa did. And when she stepped toward the door, Rex moved forward, not attacking, not barking, just standing, firm, immovable between her and the bed. His ears were forward, his eyes fixed, his entire body aligned with a single purpose. Protection. Vanessa stopped. Call him off, she said. Jackson's voice was calm. I didn't tell him to move. Margaret stirred on the bed, her voice fragile but urgent. No, don't take him. Her hand tightened weakly in Rex's fur. Vanessa's face paled. This is ridiculous, she said, stepping back. She's confused. Jackson finally turned toward her. No, he said quietly. She remembers exactly what matters. At that moment, footsteps approached. A man entered the hallway, tall and slightly stooped with age, his frame lean but steady. His hair was dark gray, cut short, and he wore a simple dark suit that had seen more work than fashion. His face carried deep lines, not from softness, but from years of dealing with things people preferred not to face. Jackson, he said. Robert Hargrove. Family attorney, reliable, precise, known for never raising his voice and never losing a case he prepared for properly. Behind him stood a uniformed officer and a woman in her 40s with a clipboard, her expression composed, but firm. She had sharp features, dark hair pulled into a tight bun, and the kind of presence that suggested she had spent years stepping into situations where kindness had already failed. Adult Protective Services, she introduced briefly. Vanessa's posture shifted again. What is this? She demanded. This, Robert said calmly, is where explanations stop and accountability begins. The documents were reviewed, carefully, methodically, every transaction, every signature, every absence where something should have been. Vanessa spoke, at first controlled, then faster, then louder. Excuses turned into arguments, arguments into deflection, but facts didn't move. They didn't argue. They just stayed. Finally, she turned back to Jackson. What do you want from me? She asked. Jackson looked past her, into the room. Margaret was asleep again. Rex had settled back down, but his position hadn't changed. Still between. Still guarding. "What you didn't give her," Jackson said. Vanessa frowned. "And what is that?" Jackson met her eyes. "Time," he said. "And consequences." The wind softened in the days that followed, as if Cedar Glen itself had grown tired of being harsh, settling instead into a quiet patience that felt almost like forgiveness. Margaret Hale returned home 8 days after being admitted, though home was still more promise than reality. Jackson had not waited for perfection. He had waited only long enough to make sure she would not have to lie on the floor again. When he carried her through the front door, she felt lighter than he remembered, not just in weight, but in presence, as though parts of her had been worn down by time and neglect. Yet when her hand found Rex's fur, something in her steadied, like a fragile structure remembering how to stand. Rex entered first. He always did now. The German Shepherd moved slowly through each room, nose low, ears alert, retracing the spaces he had guarded for months. His black and tan coat had begun to regain a faint sheen, though the lines of hardship still showed in the angles of his body. At 6 years old, he was no longer young, but he carried himself with a quiet discipline that did not belong to age. It belonged to experience, to endurance. Only after he completed his silent inspection did he return to Margaret's side. Jackson noticed. He noticed everything now. The house had begun to change, not all at once, not dramatically, but piece by piece, like a wound closing slowly rather than disappearing. A bed stood in Margaret's room again, simple, sturdy, placed near the window, where afternoon light fell soft and warm. A chair with padded arms sat beside it, positioned carefully so she could lower herself without strain. The heater had been repaired, its quiet hum now a constant presence, filling the house with a kind of steady reassurance that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with safety. Jackson had done the work himself, not because he had to, because he needed to. A man who had spent years dismantling threats now found himself rebuilding something far more delicate: trust. And trust, he was learning, required repetition, presence, time. He worked without noise, measured, efficient, intentional. But there were moments, small ones, that revealed the shift in him more than any action could. Like the way he paused before entering his mother's room, as if asking permission from the silence. Or how he listened, not for danger, but for breathing. Or the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, carrying none of the command it once held, only something quieter, something that had been buried beneath years of survival. Rex adapted, too. He followed Jackson from room to room when Margaret slept, watching him with a steady, assessing gaze, not distrustful, but not unquestioning either. The dog had seen absence. It had learned to measure reliability differently now. But the moment Margaret called, even faintly, Rex turned immediately, returning to her side without hesitation. That loyalty was not divided. It was anchored. One afternoon, as Jackson was repairing the back door lock, a sudden sound came from inside. A sharp inhale, followed by a trembling whisper. "No. No, don't." Jackson dropped the tool before it hit the ground. By the time he reached her room, Rex was already there. Margaret sat upright, her breathing uneven, her hands gripping the blanket. Rex stood beside her, his head pressed gently against her arm, his presence steadying her like a weight that kept her from drifting too far into whatever memory had found her. Jackson slowed as he approached. "Mom," he said quietly. Her eyes shifted to him, unfocused at first, then settling. "It's okay," he added. She blinked, then her shoulders lowered slightly. The moment passed, not resolved, but contained. Jackson remained standing for a second longer than necessary, watching the way Rex stayed close, The way Margaret's hand instinctively found the dog again, fingers curling into his fur, like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was then he understood something that hadn't fully formed before. Rex had not just stayed with her, he had kept her from breaking completely. That night, the house held a different kind of quiet. Not empty, not tense, just quiet. Margaret sat at the small kitchen table, a bowl of soup in front of her. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the spoon, but she managed. Each movement slow, deliberate, like someone relearning a language she once spoke fluently. Rex lay at her feet, stretched out but alert, one ear slightly lifted. Jackson sat across from her. For a while neither of them spoke. Then Margaret looked up. "You came back," she said. Her voice carried no accusation, only observation. Jackson nodded. "Yes." She studied his face, as if searching for confirmation beyond the answer. Then she gave a small, almost absent nod. "Good," she said. Rex was getting tired. The sentence landed gently, but it carried weight. Jackson glanced down at the dog. Rex's eyes were closed now, his breathing slow, but his body remained positioned between Margaret and the open space of the room. Even in rest, he guarded. Jackson exhaled quietly. A faint smile touched his lips, brief, restrained, but real. "I know," he said softly. Outside, a car engine sounded, then stopped. Jackson's gaze shifted toward the window. He didn't need to check. He already knew. Vanessa stepped out of the vehicle moments later. She looked different, not undone, but no longer composed. Her posture held tension now, her movements sharper, less fluid. The careful softness she once wore had thinned, revealing something harder beneath. She approached the door without hesitation. Jackson stood before she knocked. When he opened it, neither of them spoke immediately. Vanessa's eyes moved past him, into the house, taking in what had been restored. "You're staying," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She let out a short breath. "This town isn't your life." Jackson's expression didn't change. "It is now." Vanessa shook her head slightly. "You're throwing everything away for this." Jackson stepped aside, just enough for her to see inside. For her to see Margaret. For her to see Rex. For her to see what remained. "I'm keeping what matters," he said. Vanessa's jaw tightened. For a moment it looked like she might argue. Then she didn't. "I came for my things," she said. Jackson nodded once. "Take what's yours." She moved past him, her steps echoing lightly through the house that no longer belonged to her. Margaret did not look up. Rex did. He watched her, not with aggression, not with fear, just recognition and distance. When Vanessa finished, she paused near the door. "You think this makes you better?" she asked quietly. Jackson looked at her. "No," he said. "Then what does it make you?" He considered the question for a moment, then answered simply, "Present." Vanessa held his gaze for a second longer. Then she left. The door closed behind her with a soft, final sound. Inside, the house remained still, but it no longer felt hollow. Jackson turned back toward the kitchen. Margaret was eating. Rex was resting. And for the first time in a long while, nothing in the room felt like it was about to be taken away. Morning came gently to Cedar Glen, not with urgency, but with a quiet persistence that slipped through the curtains and settled into the corners of the house, like something patient, something willing to wait until it was noticed. Jackson Hale woke before. The light fully reached the floor. He had always been that way, trained to rise before the world, to prepare before anything moved. But this morning, there was no mission waiting, no orders, no distant horizon calling him away. Only the house, only the breath of someone still sleeping, only the steady, grounded presence of a dog who had already chosen his post for the day. Jackson stood in the doorway of Margaret's room for a moment, his broad frame still, His shoulders relaxed, but ready in a way that had become instinct. His dark hair, cut short in a military style, caught the early light, and the faint lines around his eyes, earned not from age alone, but from years of carrying responsibility, softened as he watched. Margaret was awake. She sat upright in bed, her posture not yet strong, but no longer fragile in the same way. Her silver hair, once unkempt and tangled, had been brushed neatly back, revealing a face still marked by time, but no longer shadowed by neglect. Her skin, pale but no longer ashen, held a faint warmth that hadn't been there before. And beside her, Rex. The German shepherd lay across the edge of the bed, his body half on the mattress, half anchored to the floor, as if he refused to fully surrender either position. His black and tan coat had regained much of its strength, though the story of what he had endured remained in the subtle tension of his posture. His ears were upright, his amber eyes alert, but calm, no longer scanning for threats, only watching what mattered. Margaret's hand rested in his fur. It stayed there, not because she needed to hold on, but because she wanted to. Jackson stepped inside. "Morning," he said. Margaret looked up, and this time there was no delay in recognition. "Morning," she replied. Her voice was still soft, but it no longer carried that thin edge of uncertainty. Jackson nodded once, a small gesture, but one that carried something heavier beneath it. Relief, though he would never name it that. "You sleep okay?" he asked. Margaret glanced down at Rex, her fingers brushing gently along his neck. "He doesn't let bad dreams stay long," she said. Jackson followed her gaze. Rex didn't move, but his tail gave a slow, quiet thump against the bed. There was something almost humorous in it, subtle, restrained, but enough to break the weight of the moment, just slightly. Jackson allowed a breath to pass through him. "Guess I'll have to compete with that," he said. Margaret smiled. It was small, but it was real. Later that morning, the house carried a different kind of life. Not loud, not busy, but steady. Jackson moved through it with purpose, repairing what still needed attention, adjusting what wasn't quite right, checking things that most people wouldn't think to check. His hands worked with precision, but there was something else now, something quieter guiding him. Not urgency, care. Rex followed at a distance, not shadowing every step, but never losing track. The dog had shifted again, not just a guardian of Margaret, but something broader now, a presence that belonged to the whole space, a keeper of what had been reclaimed. Around midday, a car pulled up outside. Jackson stepped out onto the porch before it even stopped. The man who exited was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered with a solid, grounded stance that came from years of physical work rather than training. His hair was graying at the temples, his beard neatly trimmed but thick, framing a face that carried both weariness and kindness in equal measure. "Name's Walter Briggs," he said, extending a hand. "I run the hardware store in town." Jackson shook it. "Jackson." Walter nodded, glancing past him toward the house. "Word gets around," he said. "Figured you might need a hand. Supplies, tools. Maybe just someone who knows which pipe actually fits where in this town." There was no pity in his tone, only offer. Jackson studied him for a moment. Men like Walter were easy to read, because they didn't try to be anything else. "I could use that," Jackson said. Walter smiled, a brief, genuine expression that didn't overstay. "Good," he replied. "Then we'll start with the back fence. Looks like it's been losing a fight with time." As they worked, Margaret watched from the window. Rex lay beside her chair, his body relaxed but his attention steady, following Jackson's movements, tracking his voice, the rhythm of his presence. At one point, Margaret spoke, her voice thoughtful. "He used to leave," she said quietly. Rex's ear shifted. Margaret's gaze stayed on Jackson. "But you stayed," she added, her hand pressing gently into the dog's fur. Rex did not respond with movement, but his stillness deepened, as if acknowledging something understood without needing to be said. By evening, the fence stood straight again. The house held warmth, and the quiet inside it no longer felt like something waiting to break. Jackson stood at the edge of the yard, looking out over Cedar Glen as the sun lowered, casting long shadows across the land. He had spent years moving forward. Now, he stood still, not because he had nowhere to go, but because he had finally found a place worth staying. Behind him, Margaret's voice called softly, "Jackson." He turned. She stood in the doorway, steady, supported, but standing. Rex beside her, always beside her. Jackson walked back, without hesitation, without distance. Inside, the light softened, the door closed, and for the first time in a long time, nothing was missing. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive as thunder or light. Sometimes they come quietly, with 4 paws, a tired heart, and the courage to stay when everyone else walks away. In a world where people leave, where time slips through our fingers, and where love is often replaced by convenience, God still leaves signs, not in perfection, but in presence, not in wealth, but in loyalty. That dog didn't speak. He didn't pray in words, but somehow, he lived out the kind of love we're all taught to believe in, the kind that protects, the kind that endures, the kind that stays. And maybe that's the miracle. Maybe God doesn't always send answers. Sometimes He sends someone or something to stand beside us, until we remember how to stand again. So if this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to believe again. Leave a comment, tell us what you felt, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that remind us what truly matters. May God watch over you, protect your home, and place someone loyal beside you, just when you need it most.